Happy game day, Seattle hockey fans. The Seattle Kraken will take on a familiar foe. That's right. We are in L.A. taking on the Kings, and a familiar storyline or storylines going into this game. Yes, indeed. Injuries and losses where the Kraken maybe feel they should have been gifted with more. We're going to break some of these storylines down and talk a little bit about regional sports networks and Jeff Baker's reporting that the Seattle Kraken might be in some trouble when it comes to a broadcast deal. All that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are the Seattle Kraken.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. I'm your host, Erica L. Ayala. We have another game day. The Seattle Kraken are taking on the L.A. Kings. We lost to them in an overtime shootout. Overtime losses keep piling up for the Seattle Kraken. Before we get into all of that, though, I want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Download the FanDuel app, and new customers will get $150 in bonus bets on any $5 moneyline bet that hits. So make sure that you visit fanduel.com/LockedOnNHL to get started. So taking on LA again, I talked about this the other day. Some people saying, well, I don't want us to get dejected coming off 2 wins in a row and then we lose in a shootout to LA. I talked about it on the show the other day, though, that while I understand that, and I do think we have a very nice and polite kind of fan base and even media core, we have to talk about a few things. And I want to go to our friends at Natural Stat Trick and show you that this is the game flow chart. And so people saying that, the Kraken were kind of sticking in there with LA, I kind of debunked that a little bit in our episode the other day, because look at this game flow chart. Everything, and increasingly throughout the game, was moving along the trajectory of the LA Kings. I mean, we just got to keep it real, folks. There's nothing wrong per se with that. Now we'll talk about the Dallas game in a little bit before we get into tonight's game against the Kings. But I just want us to be realistic. There are definitely some good things. And I think this is the rub or the difference. There were some good things happening for the Kraken for sure. That being said, and as I alluded to before the game against LA and then again after the game against LA, what the Kraken were doing good or even the best this season, is that enough when you take on the best teams in the National Hockey League, or at least in the Pacific Division? And the LA Kings are one of those teams. The Dallas Wings, one of those teams. And I think ultimately, while the effort looked better, the result, not exactly what the Kraken wanted. And then if you really potentially overthink it, as I am wont to do, if you see the Kraken playing better, or at least the eye test looking better, it kind of feels like the Kraken are playing better and they are meeting these results against top teams than what the Kraken was happening earlier in the season when we were not playing top teams, still losing in overtime, in shootouts, losing to Chicago. What was happening then? I mean, you might say water under the bridge, but when we look at this full season, and we don't know where we're going to end up come April, but we look at this full season and it's a little bit of I'm perplexed. It's a conundrum. I don't know what to make of it at all times. So I get it. You don't want to get too down on the squad. You like to see the squad fired up. Jeff Baker, who we will talk about a little bit later in the show, but he had this great article and he posted also on social media saying after the Dallas loss, you could just see and hear, if you were in the arena, that the Kraken fans wanted that game. They wanted that game. But whether you heard Ellie Tolvanen speak, Dave Haxtell speak, what we've been hearing lately from the squad in their losses in particular, and honestly in some of their wins, is that they have to start on time. The Kraken are not starting on time. Now, again, if you are an everydayer or an OGer here, you know I talked about this a lot in season 1. It was kind of like the first the first period of a game, we were still in the locker room or the dressing room while the other team was out there skating, leaving a lot of work on our goaltending. And it doesn't look exactly the same, but it feels familiar. It feels familiar, and we're hearing the Kraken say that they know they have to show up on time, start on time, end strong, full 60-minute performance, whatever cliche you want to say, but at the we got to get over the hump. We got to get over the hump. So this game in LA that we played or that we're about to play, of course, our most recent memory of the Kings was that OT game. And again, the Seattle Kraken did what we liked from that LA game is that they did just enough to get to overtime. They did just enough to get to the shootout. But there are things within the play, within regulation play, throughout the first 3 periods that I want to see the Seattle Kraken shore up on. And they're going to have the good news for those waiting for that silver lining, right? Waiting for the sweet that I'm giving you with the tart. The good news is that we have just played LA and we know what it felt like to go into an OT shootout and then again OT with Dallas. So hopefully that recent memory, muscle memory, cognitive memory will motivate the Seattle Kraken to do exactly what they say that they know they have to do, which is to start on time. That's what I want from our Kraken players today. And speaking of our Kraken players, once again, we find ourselves having to give you roster updates. We talked on Locked On Kraken on Monday about some of the injuries that happened over the weekend. We were expecting to get maybe a more full report on some of those injuries, but the Kraken did not do a morning skate today. So we won't hear from Dave Haxtell until after this show already airs live. But we can make some inferences. So I'm gonna go through some of what we know and how I think it might impact the Seattle Kraken. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities. Will the Seattle Kraken be able to find their next diamond in the rough that can get them to 40 plus goals per season? Will we return back to our forward-checking ways and get a longer winning streak going? Either way, what you're going to want to do is put your mettle, your NHL knowledge to the test on the Sleeper app. Now, I have the Sleeper app pulled up on my cellular device right here, and they have a category when you look in the app of it's got like a little flame and it's called hot, because these are the most popular picks at the moment on Sleeper, which include for Yanni Gourde. Right now, his Sleeper prediction has him at shots on goal 1.5. So are you going to take the over under more or less Yanni Gourde shots on goal 1.5 for today. He's got a 0.5 for his goals. So effectively, do you think Yanni Gourde is going to score a goal or not? And then points overall. You also see that Maddie Beniers is on here. You know, I love that personally. Maddie Beniers, very similar numbers as our good friend Yanni Gourde. But that's the cool thing. I can pick Kraken players, I can pick other players, and I can do it all on the Sleeper app. And to 100x my first deposit on Sleeper, I need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me right, Kraken fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. So start paying attention, whether it's on Locked On Kraken, Locked On NHL, or anywhere else, and nail your picks on Sleeper. Use promo code Locked On NHL, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use and details for locational availability. Thanks as always, Kraken fans, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We're going to talk about some roster changes. Now, if you were watching along or you followed up after the Dallas game, another overtime loss, there are a few things that we know. One is that Dave Haxtell and again, Jeff Baker, who we'll talk about in the next segment regarding some broader strokes, really sports business TV deal stuff. But Jeff Baker wrote after the Dallas loss that, and Dave Haxtell said this in the media scrum, that there was some frustration with some of the calls. And if you've been listening to the last few Kraken games on Root Sports, Eddie Olczyk has been doing a pretty good job of noticing too many men on the ice and noticing when effectively it's not been called. And it seems like this is now starting to get to a point where Dave Haxtell himself is mentioning this, as I recall, without a prompt. He was not asked. He just offered up information that he and his team were frustrated when they thought they should have gotten a penalty because of poor changes coming from the Dallas Wings and having too many men on the ice. Shout out to Allison Lucan, Sarah Sivian, and the crew over at Too Many Men podcast. But anyway, that's not something that we see very often from Dave. I don't think that excuses some of the things that we would have wanted to see from Seattle, including starting on time. Holy cannoli. I mentioned this the other day in our episode, but Pavelski, net front presence, Dallas getting 2 goals right off the hop. We got to fix that. We got to do better. So anyway, those are some of the frustrations currently right now with the Seattle Kraken. And Dave Haxtell keeps talking about how he feels his team has had some consistency over the season. I continue to say I'm not really seeing eye to eye with Dave Haxtell on that, at least not in the ways that we want. I think that we do lack consistency at times. We lack not just an attention to detail, but an appreciation for the hard work that's necessary to do the hard things. And that's why the injuries that we're going to talk about are a little bit tough, because we have seen Seattle Kraken players really putting their bodies on the line, on the PK in particular, but putting their bodies on the line to block shots. Now, the one thing about blocking shots that you'll often hear is that if you're blocking so many shots, that means you're not spending a lot of time in your offensive zone. So again, the consistency, the things that the Kraken need to work on, it's part and parcel with what I'm about to say. But what we also know is that there have been guys on our squad that have been committed to doing the hard work. And we need everyone to do that, because what we don't want to see is a player like Jared McCann or Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, just because of especially what he can do on the faceoff dot. We don't want to see those guys out with injury because they've had to, in order to stop a rush and an attack on their goaltender, block a lot of shots. And it would appear that McCann and Pierre-Edouard Bellemare in that Dallas game got injured, lower body, blocking shots. Blocking shots is a part of the game. Injuries are a part of the game. And I'm in a little bit of a spat, a little bit of a squabble in my YouTube mentions because the thing about injuries is it's going to happen. It's very natural in sports. There are, though, just a lot more injuries, let's just say, than the Seattle Kraken have had to deal with in the past. I likened it once to the Yukon women's basketball team. At what point do you kind of say, should we look at the training staff? I don't think that's the situation with the Seattle Kraken. Some people will point to that we don't have like an enforcer. We're going to talk about someone who got brought up from Coachella Valley, and some people kind of wanting to see maybe a player that's going to be a little bit more physical. I know, if you listen to the show, I think that I'll put it this way. The conversation that we have about physicality or like defending your teammates in the NHL, I think comes from a little bit of a skewed perspective. I'm all about physicality. If anyone who watches this show knew me as an athlete, then I don't have an issue throwing them bows, dropping the shoulder. It's all a part of the game. And you have to do it in a way that still gives your team a chance to win, because if not, then you're effectively just a hothead. And not to mention that you are causing unnecessary delays in the game. I wish, honestly, this is a random tangent, but maybe we should give delay of game penalties for fights. I don't think the NHL or hockey would ever do that because for whatever reason, fights are a part of hockey culture. I think it's ridiculous, but as we continue to move in a sports landscape where people want games to be, they want small bites, they want quick things. I just don't know how the hockey fight is going to last, but I guess that's because we also have a society that likes violence, whether it makes sense or not. Anyway, coming off my soapbox now, here is what we know. We know that Dave Haxtell spoke to media the other day, and after the Dallas game, he said he didn't have he hadn't spoken much to the medical staff with regard to Jared McCann. He didn't want to comment on what he didn't know. Said that he knew a little bit more about Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, but again, that was something that he just wanted to follow up with. We were hoping to get an update either at morning skate or otherwise, but the Seattle Kraken, we haven't had media availability, so we don't know exactly what's happening. But what we do know, and this is where it's unfortunate, what we do know is that the Seattle Kraken have placed Pierre-Edouard Bellemare on injured reserve. Here is the company now that I'm writing for, CBS Sports, but this lists all of our injuries. And this is what I'm talking about. We definitely have an injury bug happening here. IR expected to be out until at least December 27th. That's Pierre-Edouard Bellemare. So that's short term. But then we have Justin Schultz, who's day-to-day. Jared McCann listed as day-to-day. Andre Burakovsky, undisclosed injury on the injured reserve, expected to be out until at least the 27th. And then we also have Philip Grubauer. I think we're actually missing, or no, they have Jaden Schwartz there. Excuse me. I think maybe I didn't read that. Yeah, I was like, where's Jaden? Jaden Schwartz, lower body, expected to be out until at least January 11th. You hate that for Jaden. I mean, for all these guys, you don't want to see injuries, but to see that some of these guys are expected to, well, specifically, that Jaden Schwartz is expected to miss the Winter Classic. Now we'll have to see how everyone else fares, particularly Philip Grubauer. But that will lead us to a conversation that we're going to have, at least in part, in the next segment. I'm going to talk a little bit about the road to the Winter Classic and give you some Winter Classic updates, and then also get into, at least introduce a conversation about what is the future of the broadcast going to look like for the Seattle Kraken. Jeff Baker, who of course writes for the Seattle Times, covers the Kraken for the Seattle Times, I've been following him following this story, and he was on I want to make sure I get the podcast name correctly, but he was on a podcast earlier today. It's the Marine Layer podcast, and it's a really interesting conversation. Some of you may know that I used to write a lot of sports business articles when I was writing for Forbes. My writing has changed a little bit, but I still have a keen and sharp eye for that. And effectively, well, I guess I'm getting into it now. Here's the update. What Jeff Baker talks about on that Marine Layer podcast is that the regional sports network model is dying. It's, according to Jeff, and he's talked to sources, it's the last gasp. And if you listen to that podcast or read what Jeff and other people at the Seattle Times have been putting together, it sounds like as soon as next month, the middle of next month, the impact of a dying regional model might come to pass when it comes to layoffs for root sports. And Jeff Baker was asked a really interesting question by the two gentlemen who host Marine Layer podcast, and saying, what is your kind of what is the diagnosis? What's the prognosis, I guess? How much time before we see the Mariners, who own root sports, for those who maybe don't know, I'm assuming that you do. I should never assume. But that's like the Yes Network. I'm from New York, so there you go. The Yes Network is owned by the Yankees. Now, they don't only play Yankees on the Yes Network, but I could never watch the Mets on Yes. But that is a network owned by the Yankees, and then they put out regional content. And so anyway, listen to the full episode, Marine Layer podcast, if you don't already follow them. Read some of what Jeff has, but I think it's very interesting because, especially coming from a Mariners perspective, the Kraken might actually, at least in the estimations that Jeff Baker is putting out and what he's been reporting on, they might be anchoring the Mariners down. And the Trailblazers as well, the Portland Trailblazers team, just with how the money is working, how the model is working. And I thought it was interesting in this Marine Layer podcast that they were using the Shohei Ohtani signing, or him not signing in Seattle, as a little bit of the entry point to have a conversation about regional sports models and if they are indeed in trouble. So I want to keep up with this. This doesn't impact me directly because I am sadly not living in Seattle. And I do get to watch Kraken games through Fubo. But again, I want to keep a finger on the pulse here, because he's not just talking about something that's directly going to impact the Seattle Kraken potentially again as soon as next month, but also it's something in sports that we're going to have to figure out as sports consumers. I mean, this is my job, but also I'm a sports fan. So are we going to see people start going back to cable? Are we going to figure out free models? It's very, very interesting. So let's stay tuned. But coming up next, Jeff Baker also got to see the episode 2 of Road to the Winter Classic. I'm going to give you my thoughts, give you a little bit of a taste of what Jeff is taking away from that. And then if you are a Locked On Kraken insider, I've mentioned it a time or two before, but get ready, because you're going to have a special bonus episode in our video library or playlist that you can watch. That's going to give you a little insight as to the field preparations that are happening in Seattle right now. That's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now, we know that it's NFL season. We know that the Seahawks are going to be hosting a Sunday game at Lumen right before the Winter Classic on Monday at T-Mobile Park. So I'm sure you've got football and hockey on the mind. But did you know that as a new customer to FanDuel, you can get $150 in bonus bets with a $5 money bet that hits. And let's get you going. What are the odds for tonight? The Seattle Kraken, the money line, a plus 146 against the LA Kings tonight. The Kings are at a minus 176. The over 5.5 for the Kraken, under 5.5 for the Kings. I've given you money line. I've given you over under. You can also find spreads, all kinds of props, specialty bets. I talked about the whole Bedard listing, which I think is hilarious. Parlay builder, daily specials, future bets, all kinds of things. They've got McDavid Metro specials right now as well. You can find it all at FanDuel. So what we want you to do is head to fanduel.com/locked on. It's right at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on YouTube. Hi, YouTubers. If you're listening on audio, no worries. Just check your show notes. But again, that's fanduel.com/locked on to kick off the NFL season right. And the NHL season for that matter as well. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Thanks as always, Kraken fans, for making Locked on Kraken a part of your daily destination. Now, earlier today got to watch a screener of episode 2 of Road to the Winter Classic. In the first episode, if you have been listening to our show on a daily basis, then you know we featured the one and only Riker Evans in that episode. His debut, it was his rookie debut. It was at home. His family was in the stands. I talked to you also after that when Riker was asked about seeing his family's reaction. He thought it was hilarious that his mom was mic'd up. I mean, it's just adorable. So what can we expect in episode 2? Well, if you follow Locked on Kraken on social media, I gave you a little bit of a hint. We are going to see the Adam Larson t-shirt in episode 2. Episode 2 follows our guy, Joey Decord, coming off of his first ever NHL shutout. You get to see him walk around Seattle. I love that he and his girlfriend are also hot chocolate fans. Massive hot chocolate fan right here. I don't know. I don't want to say connoisseur. I feel like that's a little bit arrogant. I am definitely an enthusiast. So I loved seeing that side of Joey Decord. I posted on social media the little teaser of the Joey Decord episode on the side of the Vegas Golden Knights. We get to see them in the community, and a little bit different than the episode 1 where we see them just really having great momentum, playing well. And then the Kraken struggling. It was still a momentous occasion because it was Riker's rookie debut, but the Kraken lost and the Vegas Golden Knights get the win in episode 1. Tables turn a little bit in episode 2 of the Road to the NHL Winter Classic. Now, for those wanting to see the full episode, and we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, and that is because the full episode of Road to the NHL Winter Classic, it will air tomorrow night. It is going to be available it will air and premiere at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can find it on whether it's on the NHL Network. I believe that they're also going to have it available on YouTube. They certainly have some of the teaser clips available, but episode 2 also can be found, I said NHL Network. I meant to say TNT and Max. That's the HBO app, speaking of apps. And then also on Sportsnet in Canada. I'm really excited to give our Locked on Kraken insiders more and early access insight to a story that actually I have coming out tomorrow. And it does have to do with the Winter Classic. Steve Mayer has been a friend of this here show, Locked on Kraken, when it came to the road to the NHL draft and the docuseries, or it wasn't really a series, but the episode that featured our guy, Shane Wright. and I thought it was awesome. So Steve and I got to catch up again. You'll get to hear snippets of that audio if you are a Locked On Kraken insider. If you want to become a Locked On Kraken insider, make sure you text 918-731-3154. Text 918-731-3154. You'll get a 14-day free trial. And then after that, less than a cup of hot chocolate per month. And now's a really good time. If you're not already a Locked On Kraken insider, it's a really good time. I will be back in Seattle. We'll also have our ECHL team here in Tulsa. So we'll get to catch up with them. All good things, all things that, you're going to want to stay tuned as an insider, because you'll get either first listen and look or exclusive content, including we are probably going to get a rebrand of this show, Locked On Kraken, pretty soon. But my insiders got to see a first look and give us some feedback on the rebrand that we're looking for. So make sure, again, that if you're not already an insider, you text 918-731-3154, 918-731-3154 to get in on all the goods. Before we close out today's episode, I mentioned that we have some roster changes, and I mostly talked about the omissions, but we also have Cole Lind coming up on an emergency basis for the Seattle Kraken. Now, again, this to me points obviously to the Pierre-Edouard Bellemare absence, but then also, are we going to see Jared McCann, or will his injury keep him away? So Cole Lind, we know him through our AHL affiliate, the Coachella Valley Firebirds. When you take a look at the stats right now, when it comes to skaters, Cole Lind right now has 21 points in 23 games for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. He has 5 goals and 16 assists. He is a guy that we've seen play pretty well for the Kraken affiliate in Coachella Valley, and we're going to see him a little bit potentially against the L.A. Kings on the road. The Seattle Kraken will take on Anaheim later this week, and then they have Calgary and Philadelphia next week before the Winter Classic. I will be at the game against the Philadelphia Flyers. It's going to be a good one. I'm excited for that. And then in town for the rest of the festivities. But again, just because I'm not in Seattle doesn't mean I'm not giving you exclusive Seattle Kraken content. So make sure you become an insider. That's all we have for today's show. I've got to get ready because the Tulsa Oilers are going to be hosting, or excuse me, the Mavericks are hosting Tulsa tonight. And then on Friday, Tulsa hosts the Mavericks. So we'll have some more ECHL updates for you as well. But as I always say, be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another. It is an honor and a thrill to host this episode. And even when we don't agree, I am so grateful for your engagement and interaction. We are less than 30 subscribers away from 1,000 on YouTube. So if you're listening on audio, and certainly if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Once we get subscription, that's going to help us integrate a little bit more with some of your other favorite shows, like, of course, Locked On NHL and our national programs that are a part of our 24/7 streaming YouTube channel, Locked On Sports Today. Also want to remind you that it's a game day, which means that you can listen to your choice of broadcast, either the Kings broadcast or the Kraken broadcast, on Sirius XM. So, hey, even if the cords get cut, at least we have the Sirius XM app where we can pick our own broadcast. With that said, let's hold fast, let's stay true, and let's go Kraken. We say loud and proud tonight. I will catch you on the next episode of Locked On Kraken. Until then, Erica L. Ayala signing out. Peace out, everybody.